Story 1. Politicians should wear uniforms that display their corporate sponsors, like racing drivers. Story 2. Do like Canada, and if the government cannot function, throw everyone out and hold new elections to replace them. Story 3. All politicians, past and present, are subject to the laws of the land regardless of where they are. Story 4. Regulate insurance companies. Their overreach has become excessive. Remove insurance from medicine. Insurers should not dictate medical decisions or tell doctors what they can and cannot do. Story 5. When the government shuts down, all taxes are paused for Americans. Story 6. A ban on any non-American organizations and entities making donations to politicians, their campaigns, and political committees. Story 7. It did exist, but undoing Citizens United would be a massive undertaking. Story 8. Businesses cannot own more than a certain percentage of housing in any given area. Everything else must be inhabited by the owner. Please, someone more knowledgeable than I am, explain how this would work without causing rents to increase dramatically. Story 9. Corporations are not people. Free speech is for all people and should be protected unless you are paid to speak or to influence. In that case, you should be legally accountable for what you say. Story 10. The American rule is that each party pays its own attorney's fees unless they signed a contract that says otherwise or their state has established a right to attorney's fees for certain claims. This differs from many other countries, where the losing party pays the winning party's attorney's fees. The United States system makes it more likely that someone sues over questionable claims if they have the money, and it can incentivize people to file lawsuits simply to obtain a favorable settlement. A winner-take-all system makes it less likely that people file questionable claims, and we may want plaintiffs to bring claims even when they are unsure they will win, but it also makes it easier for people with fewer resources to pursue meritorious claims. It is a subtle rule, but changing it would significantly shift the analysis of when to file a claim. Story 11. Banning felons from holding political office. Story 12. National holidays for national elections. Let's see what happens if everyone actually showed up. Story 13. Government shutdown. No one in government gets paid until operations are up and running, not even the president. Congress cannot leave the District of Columbia either. Story 14. Add term limits for members of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Enact a law prohibiting members of Congress from trading individual stocks. Enact a law stating that if the government shuts down due to the absence of an appropriations bill, an election will be held within 90 days for each affected seat. Enact a law requiring that the people vote on congressional pay and benefits. If you see a trend here, it is intentional. Story 15. Support critical federal service workers. A short list of essential personnel should be paid from an auxiliary fund regardless of government shutdowns. Story 16. Use of artificial intelligence in pictures and videos needs to be clearly labeled as such. Story 17. All realistic artificial intelligence-generated images must be clearly labeled as such. Penalties should escalate based on the extent of image distribution. Story 18. Ban corporate ownership of single-family homes and limit corporate ownership of rental units to a maximum percentage of the market. Story 19. Deduct Social Security taxes from all income, not just the first $176,100 of earnings. Story 20. Application fees for renting condominiums and apartments should be illegal. Story 21. Ranked choice voting would eliminate the two-party system and the 180-degree shifts in policy every 4 to 8 years. Story 22. A law giving banks the ability to cancel subscription charges when a consumer cannot do so with a merchant is needed. Currently, this is not possible. If a merchant goes out of business, has no account option or customer service, or is a scam, nothing can be done short of closing the entire account. Not even reporting fraud and changing the card number will help. In this economy, who can afford to keep paying for unwanted charges? Story 23. The speakerphone is automatically disabled on public transit and in restaurants. Story 24. Forget everything else. The most game-changing law that does not exist yet is universal basic income. This is not about a small credit or a temporary handout. This is the Economic Freedom Act. It deposits a regular, no strings attached cash payment into every adult's bank account. It is economic jet fuel for the bottom 90%. Rent stress falls and people can finally pay for overdue car repairs. It treats poverty like an engineering problem and solves it with direct cash flow, immediately giving millions of Americans the breathing room to build a stable life. It is the ultimate financial floor. Story 25. Corporations are not people and do not have people's rights. Individuals own themselves and their deoxyribonucleic acid and have a right to privacy. Story 26. Raise the minimum wage to what it would be if it had been tied to inflation, and pass a law to tie it to inflation permanently. We could have a middle class again. Story 27. Either tax loans taken out against stock as realized gains or disallow using stock as collateral for loans. Story 28. No private money should be allowed in political races. Public funding should cover basic advertisements. Story 29. Eliminate all non-compete agreements permanently. Require a minimum of 1 month's severance pay for layoffs. Story 30. Universal healthcare. Who would have guessed that people perform better when the basic things in life are provided, such as comprehensive healthcare, income security, social security, equitable distribution of wealth, and individual dignity? Anyone who chips away at these or refuses to strengthen them is an idiot. Story 31. Any police officer who cannot provide body camera footage on request, during an arrest, or at any time is immediately stripped of rank and must return to the police academy for a minimum of 1 year. After 3 occurrences, the officer will be terminated and permanently barred from police and security work. If the missing footage concerns a fatal incident in which the officer kills someone, termination and a permanent ban will be immediate. Story 32. A law that limits how much more the highest paid person in a company can earn compared to the lowest paid employee. Story 33. Chief Executive Officer income cannot exceed 50 times the average employee's salary. Story 34. Limits on special interest money and insider trading by elected officials. Story 35. If the government shuts down, all members of Congress will not be paid. Story 36. Public financing for all elections completely removes private funding and the ability to purchase politicians. Everyone who runs for office receives the same amount of money and there is no outside funding. As a result, anyone can run for office, and elections are no longer an index of wealth or of the ability to raise money. This changes the class of people who run, disempowers lobbyists, and restores power to the public. Story 37. Applying Social Security taxes to all wages would ensure the wealthy pay their fair share and make Social Security solvent. Story 38. Once you have earned $100 million in annual revenue, any excess automatically goes to social programs that fund food and shelter nationwide. This should be law in every country so the wealthy cannot avoid it. Story 39. It is already law, I suppose, but actually enforcing the no monopolies rule would do wonders. A new law should prohibit ownership of homes and businesses by hedge funds and money market funds. This should specifically include hospitals, daycare centers, veterinary clinics, and medical and dental practices. They are extracting so much money that the effect is felt in Canada, I am told. Story 40. A government shutdown leads to immediate elections for the House and Senate. Story 41. Minimum wage is the amount established when it was created. It is the lowest wage a working adult must earn by working 40 hours per week to support a spouse and 2 children. Story 42. We have a double dissolution rule in Australia. If the Senate fails to pass a bill twice, the whole government is dissolved and both houses return to the polls. You would no longer have to deal with another government shutdown. Instead, you can vote the politicians causing the problems out. Story 43. If Congress cannot pass a budget, its members are locked in the building until the impasse is resolved, as in a papal conclave. Story 44. Caps on excessive medical treatment, prescription drug, and insurance plan costs. Story 45. Universal or free healthcare exists in almost every country, even the poorest ones. Story 46. Release the unredacted Epstein files and prosecute everyone involved as we would any other sex offenders, imposing maximum punishment in a maximum security prison. This would address government corruption. Story 47. Implement term limits. Politicians cannot exempt themselves from legislation they pass. Politicians must receive the same health care as people covered by government programs. If a politician is caught lying, they are immediately removed from office. Story 48. A law that requires everyone, including the president, to follow the law. Story 49. If the government is shut down by Congress, members of Congress do not get paid. Story 50. Those who take an oath of office but violate it are fired. Story 51. The law should be enforced fairly and equally. Judges should be subject to legal consequences if they fail to do so. Story 52. Every office in America should be limited to 2 terms, or 8 years in office, whichever is greater. Simple, easy, no exceptions. The Founding Fathers could never have imagined someone making a career of politics. Their intent was for our representatives to be citizens who would serve the government for a short period and then return to private life. The only way this country will survive is to normalize ordinary citizens running for office, serving a short term, and then returning to private life as productive members of society. Story 53. Politicians should not have access to different or better health care than their constituents. Also, politicians should not earn a lifetime pension for serving their country for 2 to 4 years. What other occupation provides such a fantasy financial benefit? Meanwhile, the rest of us struggle to retire. Story 54. Ban qualified immunity and require police officers to carry liability insurance. All payouts to citizens for violations of their rights or injuries should be paid from an officer's insurance or salary. Story 55. The Jones Act needs to be amended. I would like to see a concrete plan to balance the budget and begin paying down the deficit. I support both spending cuts and tax adjustments. The Department of Veterans Affairs needs to be restructured, and care for veterans must be drastically improved. Story 56. The president cannot accept bribes in the form of airplanes, Bitcoin, or ballrooms. This would help millions because the president would have to concentrate on governing, not lining their own pockets or having their ego stroked. Story 57. We need laws repealed more often than new ones enacted. Members of Congress should not receive lifetime healthcare benefits. Sunset clauses should be standard. The Jones Act should be repealed. Story 58. Outlaw unlimited anonymous donor spending and campaign contributions. Story 59. End qualified immunity and make police officers directly liable for serious misconduct. Story 60. If the government is shut down, Congress does not get paid. If they do not reopen it within a reasonable time, we will vote to replace all members and bar them from holding office again, either for a set period or permanently. Whatever health care is available to the public will also be the health care available to them. Story 61. Term limits, banning private money in politics, and universal health care are among many priorities. Story 62. A president who incites insurrection is immediately removed from office. Story 63. Private equity firms cannot own single-family homes. Congress cannot trade stocks. No cutting in line. Story 64. We need a federal privacy standard similar to what the European Union established for its citizens with the General Data Protection Regulation and what California established for its residents with the California Consumer Privacy Act. Our data should not be sold without our explicit consent. Story 65. Pass a law to overturn the Citizens United decision. Businesses are not people. Story 66. Repeal the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution established the direct election of United States senators in each state. The amendment supersedes Article 1, Section 3, Clauses 1 and 2 of the Constitution, under which senators were appointed by state legislatures. It also changes the procedure for filling vacancies in the Senate, allowing state legislatures to permit their governors to make temporary appointments until a special election can be held. Story 67. Data dividends. Companies paying users a monthly amount for the use of their personal data. Story 68. Ban the sale of information collected from job applications and resumes to data brokers. Story 69. Term limits on members of Congress. It is hilarious how many people are addicted to blaming the president of either party when there are people who have been in Congress for 40 years doing the same old song and dance and not fixing anything. Story 70. Chief executive officers cannot earn more than 20 times the lowest paid worker in the entire company. Story 71. Health insurers and large pharmaceutical companies cannot engage in price gouging or price fixing. Story 72. Chief executive officer pay is capped at X% of the lowest paid worker's pay. All assets must be owned by the chief executive officer and taxed. Company ownership of everything that prevents workers from owning assets is prohibited. Story 73. Corporations should not be allowed to own single-family homes. Story 74. All writing, photos, and videos created by artificial intelligence and shared in any medium must be labeled as such. Story 75. Federal law regarding drunk drivers. I am tired of seeing mugshots for second or third offenses when the driver has killed someone behind the wheel. Story 76. We need the same law they have in England. If you file a frivolous lawsuit and lose, you must pay the attorney's fees for both parties. Story 77. Flat rate pricing for all medical procedures, visits, and medications, with transparent upfront prices to allow shopping around and obtaining multiple quotes. Story 78. All vehicles on the highway must remain below the maximum lumen output for headlights. They are becoming too bright. Story 79. Improved Medicare for all. No more private health insurance mafias. Story 80. Make it illegal for corporations to purchase residential housing. This drives prices sky high and contributes to the housing shortage. Story 81. A convicted felon or sex offender cannot hold any political office. Story 82. You can't be a presidential candidate when you're a convicted felon and an orange, narcissistic, fascist turd. Story 83. Establish term limits for members of the House of Representatives, members of the Senate, and justices of the Supreme Court. Story 84. Make housing a utility and not a commodity. Stop turning every part of life into a fucking investment or a gamble. Story 85. How about something fun? Election day is now a holiday, and every eligible voter receives a root beer float and a cheeseburger. Story 86. Each 4th of July, the richest politician is sacrificed into a volcano. Story 87. No convicted felons may serve as president, serve in Congress, or serve as a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States. Story 88. Make it illegal to profit from healthcare. Treat political contributions as bribes and prosecute them aggressively. Have settlements for police brutality paid directly from officers' pay and pensions. Make it illegal for convicted felons to run for, accept, or hold any political office. Story 89. Term limits for Congress at the federal level and equivalent limits at the state level. Story 90. The salaries of the CEO and other high-level executives are capped at a set percentage of the salaries of the lowest-paid workers in their company. Story 91. A government shutdown that lasts more than 5 days results in the immediate forfeiture of all congressional seats and the presidency, followed by a snap election to determine who will finish the terms. Story 92. Term limits. I'm not sure how they would help, but this would be a good law to have. Yesterday's government is not the same as today's. Someone who has been in office for 30 or more years is unlikely to make changes for the future. Story 93. Paid parental leave for the first year of a child's life for both mother and father. Story 94. Holding corporate executives criminally liable for the laws their companies break. Story 95. Reverse Citizens United and move to publicly funded elections, as most modern democracies have done. The United States has become a banana republic because of legalized corruption. Implement term limits and hold a referendum on ethics rules for the Supreme Court. Story 96. Remove the words over 65 from the Medicare enabling legislation. Story 97. If the government ever shuts down, snap elections will be called. Implement ranked choice voting. Declare gerrymandering illegal. Implement mixed-member proportional representation, a hybrid system with local districts and compensatory party seats to ensure overall seat totals match vote shares. Story 98. There should be age limits for public office. People over 70 should not hold office. I say this as someone who is only a few years away. Story 99. Laws allowing or protecting mutual combat still do not exist in 48 states. Story 100. We already have enough laws. The problem is that they only enforce the ones they want. Story 101. If Congress fails to pass an appropriations bill, all federal workers will continue to work and be paid at existing levels. Story 102. Any sale of personal information should require that 20% of the sale price be distributed to each affected individual as a residual payment, and individuals must be allowed to opt out of the sale of their information. Story 103. Given the quality of suggestions so far, I am going to go with prohibit anyone who has commented in this Reddit thread from voting. Story 104. Private equity firms should not be able to buy up single-family homes. Story 105. Corporations are not allowed to buy real estate. Rents and house prices have skyrocketed. Story 106. Anyone running for public office must have at least 5 years of paid hourly work experience within the previous 10 years. Story 107. Prohibit foreign individuals and foreign companies from owning land or real estate. Impose restrictions on short-term rentals. Story 108. Ban rental businesses from buying standalone houses and renting them out. Story 109. Each member of Congress receives a 10 by 10 poster. The poster must list all sponsors, and each logo size is proportional to the amount of money the member receives from that sponsor. Story 110. Repealing laws would help more people than making new ones. Story 111. Tax evasion. Billionaires live in California while millions of people struggle to stay afloat. Story 112. A law requiring politicians to disclose who is funding them would be a great start, followed closely by a complete ban on corporate donations to politicians. One law that could single-handedly stop much of the corporate takeover and domination of our political system would be to reverse the Citizens United Supreme Court decision by creating a law that specifically excludes corporate bodies from declaring themselves to be people entitled to constitutional rights intended to protect actual human individuals, not corporations. Story 113. Age limit for politicians. At a certain age, politicians must retire from government service and are not eligible to apply for any political office. Story 114. Enforcement of the law should mean everyone is truly equal before the law, with no exemptions for social status or wealth. Story 115. Taxation of all corporate shares begins when a profit is realized after the corporation becomes publicly traded. Limitation on the percentage of a corporation's shares that may be sold in an initial public offering. Story 116. Automatic tax returns. We are one of the only countries that do not have an automated tax system. It is solely because of TurboTax. Story 117. Members of Congress should be paid the minimum wage in their state and have the same health insurance that the rest of us must pay for. Things might change quickly if that were the case. Story 118. Legally protected maternity, paternity, and family leave. Story 119. Only a natural person who is a United States citizen may give money to a political campaign and must donate from within their voting district or state. Corporations, nonprofit organizations, and other entities may not give money to any political candidate. Story 120. Politicians should be regularly investigated for corruption. Story 121. Nothing will help if we do not start enforcing them universally. Story 122. Universal health care. It is absolutely absurd that the wealthiest nation on earth can let its citizens go bankrupt if they get sick. Story 123. Healthcare is a right. We can afford to cover everyone if we expand Medicare to include every person. Insurance companies are undermining health coverage because their primary concern is the bottom line. Story 124. Make college and healthcare free for all citizens and fund them with taxes on the wealthiest individuals. Story 125. Capping the pay and total reimbursements of the chief executive officer and other executives at 50 times that of their average employee. Story 126. Ban online gambling, including prediction markets and sports betting. It causes millions of people to become gambling addicts and lose everything so that a few thousand can win big. Gambling should be either completely banned or operated as a heavily regulated government monopoly. Story 127. A law against paid lobbying, also known as influencing politicians with money. Story 128. A law that prohibits any member of Congress, including senators and representatives, and the president from earning income outside their salary. Story 129. Single-family homes cannot be owned by corporations, trusts, or businesses of any kind, especially not by foreign entities. Story 130. Balanced Budget Amendment. Jail time if representatives do not comply. Story 131. The federal budget is passed every year. If the budget fails to pass, an election is called. Story 132. All officials are elected by popular vote using ranked choice voting, and the Electoral College is completely abolished. Story 133. Medicare for all would be a win for people, businesses, and entrepreneurs who could obtain healthcare and attract talent because they would not have to compete with large companies, and we could negotiate prices. Most costs in our healthcare system come from administrative expenses rather than clinical services. Story 134. Fines should be a percentage of an individual's income, not a flat rate. Business fines should equal the amount they saved or made by breaking the law, multiplied by 4. Story 135. Eliminate the cap on the Social Security tax. If you rob and loot billions, you should pay Social Security tax on all of it. Story 136. Ban factoring short-term metrics, such as quarterly stock prices, into executive compensation. This practice is what is causing everything to be dire now in the United States. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.